We're here talking about a recent New York Times investigation. The investigation was about a coal plant in Mississippi, in Kemper County, Mississippi. And this is my first Facebook Live, so we're going to stumble our way through. The topic of the story was a sort of intensive look at this federally subsidized, very hopeful coal plant that was and is supposed to burn coal cleaner. It has had many problems. It currently is facing an SEC investigation, an OSHA investigation, 2 lawsuits. It's about two years over deadline, $4 billion over budget. And so our attempt was to sort of figure out why. And with me today is Charles Grayson. He's the director of the Bigger Pie Forum, which is a organization, a think tank down in Mississippi, a pro-growth think tank. And Bigger Pie Forum has been doing a lot of really good work on this topic for several years now, really digging into the problems at this plant, at this project. And Brett Wingo, who is an engineer formerly who worked at this project with Southern Company, and for many years was a key player in this project, became disillusioned with it, and eventually began raising concerns from within the plant, and ultimately blew the whistle and went outside the plant, and was one of the main sources in the story. So this will just be a conversation with these two guys who I've been talking to for about 6 months now about this project and what we can learn about it. And my name is Ian Urbina. I'm an investigative reporter with the New York Times. So I guess for starters, I would start with you, Charles, and just say, what do you think in general was hopeful about this plant and this project?
Well, by the time I got involved, I was not very hopeful, but I think for the state that it would be a new technology that would put Mississippi on the map, that it would provide a lot of jobs for decades to come. I think those were the two major driving forces. The fact that there was some federal money available is always of interest in Mississippi.
And to add to that, I would say, to me, and when you talk with the utility, they nod, aggressively. The project was hopeful for the county, the state, the nation, and the world, in the sense that if they could get this technology to work and to work affordably, it would perhaps provide a way forward for the climate change problem, how to burn coal, produce electricity, but without such harmful emissions. And so Brett, you, as I said before we began, I see sort of 2 arcs in this story. One is the arc about the project, which started with all these hopes. It was a bipartisan debacle, is how one regulator described it to me. You had Haley Barbour, a Republican governor in a Republican state, strongly pushing the project. And you had the Obama administration, obviously a Democratic administration, also strongly pushing the project. It went from hope to skepticism, as it fell further in debt. And then personally, as I see it, I saw a sort of journey where you were initially a promoter and a big believer and a pitchman even for this project within the company, within the industry, but through time you became more and more concerned. Just tell me what your concerns were.
I will, and let me say right up front, if we had built it for $2.4 billion and finished it by May 1st of 2014, I'd still be a promoter of the project, but that's obviously not how things happen. My work started out, like you said, I was really excited about the technology. I was proud to be on this. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity as an engineer and a project manager. However, by the time 2012 rolled around, I realized there were serious problems. There was no way we were going to meet our schedule, and yet we kept sticking to it doggedly, which defied sense. Being a project manager, I pushed and I pushed, and I pushed a little bit too hard. I informed top management. I actually informed the CEO that the schedule was a fraud in March of 2014. Instead of being rewarded for that by getting a better management team in, I was told to leave it alone and go off and do other things. So I did. And unfortunately, the same team that was responsible for manipulating the schedules and putting out false information were the same people that were in charge of starting up the plant. And I've got to tell everyone, this is the most dangerous part of the project, is starting up a plant like this for the first time. It's high pressure with a lot of toxic, explosive gas inside of it. You don't just rush into this, and yet these were the same people that had manipulated financials. So the tipping point came when I had project managers that I had reported to previously lie to me about some photos that were taken in the combined cycle portion of the plant in July and August of 2014. When I went to these gentlemen, they were the last two people that I thought I had any political friends with in the company, and so that's why I went to them. Actually, I asked them to shut the plant down. Instead of shutting the plant down, they told me to trust these people that had previously manipulated our financials, and then they lied to me. They told me that the pictures of concern showed damaged and not improperly installed pipe supports, which is a big deal. If you're a mechanical engineer, this is a big deal. It'd be like seeing a piece on an airplane engine not being installed properly. There's consequences to it. You just don't go down that road. Instead of addressing the issue, they decided to just lie and say that those pictures were not taken in the part of the plant that they were starting up. They said it was way over there, over 1,000 feet away. But the thing is, there's GPS tags on each and every one of those pictures, and they clearly are in the part of the plant that was running. And that was when I realized I had no more
And so to recap, again, in case anyone's joining us now, what we have here is a plant that is still not online. It is at the current tab about $6.7 billion cost, and each extra month that it's delayed, it's $20 to $25 million more in debt. It's a very hopeful project in Kemper County, Mississippi, but it's been fraught. And at root, one of the more serious investigations that is pending with this project is an SEC investigation, a Sarbanes-Oxley-based investigation. And my sense in talking with folks is that what that investigation is probably trying to assess is whether this was a case of mismanagement or a case of fraud. And specifically on the issue you allude to, when this company sold this project to the public and to its investors and to regulators, did they knowingly mislead on the core issues of how cheaply it could be produced and how quickly it could come online? On that question, just briefly, tell me, on the mismanagement to fraud spectrum, where do you think this project sits?
It sits squarely within the mismanagement. There's no denying that. I witnessed that. I can directly testify factually that there was attempted fraud. Now, whether that was actually perpetrated, this was in 2014 when I had when my schedule was manipulated. I know there was an attempted fraud. I think it angles strongly towards a case of fraud if you look at the original numbers for certification. Roughly $2.2 to $2.4 billion cost that you could finish by May of 2014. It was real clear to me in 2012 when I started looking at those, at trying to actually accomplish that it was a physical and fiscal impossibility. And I have to believe that if nothing else, if they were reckless financially, and if that constitutes fraud, then it was fraud.
And again, to make this a story, or to sort of show that this is a story not just about a plant in Mississippi, but about something larger, I think what matters here is, there's a lot of money, taxpayer money, ratepayer money on the table, investor money, that has been dumped into this project, and the question becomes, was that wasted or misused? And B, there's a lot of political capital and urgency surrounding the technology that this was supposed to showcase in terms of dealing with the environment and our energy challenges, and that's also on the table. If you, Charles, had to, since you've really followed this for quite some time, if you had to isolate what you think were some of the big picture fundamental flaws or sleights of hand, what would you point to?
Well, the fact that it was a political process from the get-go, that it was sold politically from the beginning, and that was partially the federal funds that were going to be available. It then became the oversight that was needed for a monopoly investment of the site was not there. And thirdly, the PSC, who was to oversee this project for the ratepayers, relied on the company for most of their information until well into the project. So you had the fox guarding the hen house on this. So political process, regulators absent without leave, the power company in charge of most of the information that was being used to make decisions. So total breakdown.
And so as I understand
protection.
it, it's partially a story about regulatory capture, where the very agency, the Public Service Commission, that was supposed to be slowing things down perhaps and asking really aggressive questions about whether this was a good move for the state and a good investment. They were not aggressive enough. They were putting their foot on the gas, not the brake.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I would even say that a PSC in a small state like Mississippi, maybe even in a large state, is not really capable of overseeing a large new technology investment. And particularly within a monopoly, because of the adverse, the disincentives that you have in a monopoly to manage capital costs and so forth. So those combinations of inability, new technology, monopoly, I think is just a recipe for disaster.
And so, again, to pull the helicopter up higher to altitude, my sense is that to some degree this is a story about a very hopeful and urgent technology, which is carbon capture. And by that is meant, or sometimes the industry calls it clean coal, and by that is meant the ability to burn coal to produce electricity, but with far fewer harmful emissions. Okay, that's the hope. And this project was sort of the poster child of that hope. So the big question begged by this project being a mess now is whether that tells us something about the fate of carbon capture, of clean coal. In prior conversations, what I've heard from you guys is that there were some challenges with this project that are illustrative of all carbon capture projects. You and I spoke of this briefly. Just tell me why is, and typically it's not the technology, we figured that part out.
Right.
It's more often the economics.
It's
So
an
just tell me,
economic issue.
just break that down for me if you would. What are the economic challenges of carbon capture?
Well, first of all, you start out with a very large capital cost to carry out this process. And the capital costs drive your overall costs so high that you have to get some value out of the CO2. So where are you going to sell the CO2 on the quantities that you're talking about? And so that mismatch just limits the number of possible locations you even have any hope of making it economical.
So it seems to me, and I know there are questions coming in from the audience. I may be able to get to them. If I don't, then we'll try to do it on the website. But it seems to me what I've heard from you and others is, one, you have a waste product, which is the carbon, and that's going to be an expense if you just have to dispose of it.
Right.
If you can sell it, in the case of this plant, they hope to sell it and use it to stimulate oil wells, then now you've brought the cost down. But that market for selling it is an iffy market, and
It's
that's
very
one
iffy,
challenge.
and even in this case, we've looked at some detail of the value of the byproduct that they were going to receive. It doesn't change the fundamental economics. It just made a ding in a very big problem.
May I bring up something real quick? Now, we're talking about one byproduct, and that's CO2, and that's what everyone cares about when we're talking about global warming. But there are other byproducts. Coal is very dirty. And so when you make it clean, you're just cleaning it. It's not alchemy, it's chemistry. So you strip off the CO2, but you also wind up with sulfur that you have to sell, sulfuric acid or elemental sulfur. You have to have a market for it nearby. You also wind up with ammonia. That's a byproduct that you have to have a market for. If you can't get rid of it, you can't run the plant. And let's not forget, we're still creating tons and tons of ash.
Right.
That have to be stored.
Right.
So there's a lot of streams
That's a very
that
good
come off.
point. Often in this discussion, myself included, that point gets missed.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is, if you're going to look at the economics of a project like this, you have to look at the competitive costs, right? And in this case, we have the nat gas story. So that story looks like this: fracking, revolutionized the energy field. The price of natural gas fell through the floor and keeps falling. And so if you're doing an economic assessment of whether to use coal to produce electricity or an alternative, natural gas is your cheaper alternative. Right. And my sense in our discussions is that one of the key moments when this became maybe mismanagement, maybe fraud, was early in the selling of this project. There was an assumption made about what the price of nat gas would be in year 2015, 2016. And the company said one thing, but the federal data and other analysts were saying quite another. Charles, just walk me through that. What happened there?
Yeah, so they use natural gas prices that were, even at the time they used them, were like roughly 3 times the existing natural gas prices. And they projected that the natural gas prices would go up fairly sharply from there. That at its core was what made their case that maybe this thing could make economic sense. They continued to stay with those estimates even into 2012. When, they used them originally in 2010. They stayed with those same in 2012, et cetera. So it was just a sleight of hand to say, no, we know better than anybody else what natural gas prices will be, and they're going to be way up here and not down here.
And therefore it's competitive.
And therefore it will be
the better
competitive.
option. Okay.
I'll just make the point that it would not be competitive even at 7, 8, 9, 3, 4 times current natural gas prices.
So yeah, so we should wrap up. I guess that's the last point I would seek from you, Brett, is at some point you saw this becoming a corporate fraud problem, and you then began seeing this as a public safety and a worker safety problem. And,
right.
And as you've told me, that's when you really decided you need to go public. What are the worker safety concerns you have, or the public safety concerns?
Well, number one, there's a culture inside Southern Company that promotes, quite frankly, yes men into management positions, and these are the people that are leading our workers into startup. I'm really afraid right now for the workers on the plant site, because you have good, hard-working engineers that are going to be given deadlines, especially after your article, Ian. Quite frankly, they're going to accelerate the timetable to try to prove you wrong. And these people will cut corners, they will take shortcuts, and they will make mistakes. I still receive reports of near asphyxiation incidents where they haven't properly isolated systems, where they've caught equipment on fire inside the gasifier structure, and this has been independently verified. I've reached out to multiple sources. So this is just a continuation of the problems that led to me telling them I had a lawyer, and which is what led to them trying to sue me into silence and eventually firing me.
So first of all, thank you guys for traveling all the way up here. I think we are closing down. We'll keep covering this, but I appreciate the work you've done on this.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for your work.
Thank you.